Good morning, everyone. We'll just wait a few more minutes for everyone to pop on. Great. Well, we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you all for joining us today as we discuss how to uncover the full value of water stewardship investments. I'm Kirsten James, the Senior Program Director for Water at Ceres. For those of you who may be a bit newer to Ceres, we are a sustainability nonprofit organization working with capital market leaders to solve the world's greatest sustainability challenges, such as water resources, the issue we will be focusing on today. And before we get started, just a few quick housekeeping notes. This session is being recorded and we'll send it out to you all next week. So if you want to take a second look or share it with any of your colleagues, you will get that in your inbox. Also, we'll be holding time at the end for some Q&A. So please think of questions and put those in the chat box as they arise, and we'll try our best to get to them all at the end. And then lastly, you can find the analysis that we'll be discussing in a link in the chat. We'll also provide it again at the end to make sure you have that handy. And I invite you all to take a closer look after today's session. So with that, I'd like to ask my fellow panelists to each just provide a brief introduction of themselves before we get started. And Paul, I'll start first with you.
Thanks, Kirsten. Yeah, Paul Rieg. I'm the founder of a company called Bluerisk. We provide kind of management consulting, strategy and analysis for the private sector as it relates to water. And I was part of the project team involved in the publication and research that we're going to be talking about today.
Great. And Howard?
Yeah, great. Howard here. So coming in from London in the UK. I work for Reckitt as our head of data and insights for our social impact team, and also lead our work on water access, sanitation access in communities. So great to be here, and thanks for having me as part of the discussion.
And Piers.
Hi everyone, thank you for dialing in today. I'm the head of global stewardship at Franklin Templeton, and I think probably the other relevant piece of this introduction is that we also co-chair the Valuing Water Finance Initiative with Ceres and other investors.
Terrific. And we hope to be joined shortly by Jean Farber with Danone as well. But it's really wonderful to be joined by such a great group of panelists today. Really looking forward to the conversation. So today marks the launch of the Ceres and Bluerisk analysis, the development of a company-level cost-benefit analysis framework, which of course serves as the impetus for today's discussion. Before diving into the discussion with our panelists, I think it's helpful to frame the conversation with just a little bit of context on, first, why it is important to further build out the business case for water stewardship and really understand the full value of water. And then second, how Ceres and some of our partners have been approaching this. So as many of you know, Ceres has worked for many years with the business community, institutional investors, the NGO community, many of you on the line, to address water risk. We really come at the issue recognizing the critical need to shift how our capital markets value water if there's any chance of achieving a sustainable water supply for all. So with that in mind, last August, in partnership with the government of the Netherlands, we launched the Valuing Water Finance Initiative in really an effort to scale our work, given the massive scope of the challenge and the problem that we're all facing. So this investor-led initiative seeks to engage companies with a high water footprint to really value and act on water as a financial risk and drive the necessary large-scale change to better protect water systems. But despite some significant inroads, we have recognized that that really additional work is necessary to bolster the financial case around water risk in order to compel more stakeholders in the private sector to act. So we went thinking about how we can help continue to build out a robust financial business case. So taking a step back, we started by really trying to better understand company impacts on water resource and the cost of addressing those impacts. So to do that, last year, again, in partnership with Bluerisk and also partners at DWS and S&P Global, we took an important step in the work by identifying externalities and evaluating the financial implications of addressing them. This research really hit home that companies are not passive actors of the water crisis, and their operations create additional risk by not addressing their impacts on water resources. And as you see here on the slide, addressing this risk can have a hefty price tag. For example, the analysis found that the cost of addressing harmful water impacts could lead to a change in company evaluation up to negative 47% and top nearly 1.8 billion annually for some of the firms analyzed. So this isn't the topic of the discussion today, but I encourage you all to take a look at the link in the chat to explore these briefs in a bit more detail. And they really set the stage for the conversation today as well. So with this powerful research in hand, we really continued the conversations with our partners to think about how we could build upon this work. How could we develop a cost-benefit analysis, something that would really resonate with company leadership, that appropriately accounts not only for the cost to address those externalities, which the materiality briefs that I just mentioned spoke to, but also the benefits of doing so, considering the full value of water. And this last piece is really important to emphasize. So what do I mean by the full value of water? Well, there's been somewhat of an evolution in how companies have thought about the value of water and brought it into business decision-making. So there's the price of water, but we all know the price of water alone isn't going to do it, as water is not priced correctly. Then there's been an evolution to explore the shadow price of water. So in other words, taking that price that is paid and using some kind of risk multiplier to help justify a return on investment. There's been other approaches, companies really exploring the full cost of water by looking at treatment costs and energy costs, et cetera. So all of these mechanisms really help to highlight that water is more important than the price you pay for it. But as companies unpack this, as we've thought about this more, we've really recognized that the company dependency on water is much bigger than any of these, the shadow price, the full cost, because water delivers value in many, many ways across the business. For example, it delivers value because it allows for supply security in the supply chain. It allows a business to strengthen relationships with stakeholders and create social value in the watershed. It delivers value through brands, employees, customers, and the list goes on. So to sum it up, price, shadow price, full cost are helpful to better understand hidden costs related to water, but don't acknowledge the full suite of benefits both to the business and society of taking action. So we really need to move towards understanding the full value of water to truly catalyze action. And that brings us to our discussion today and the new analysis that we are releasing, which helps to do just that. So with that framing, I want to turn it over to one of the co-authors, Paul Rigg, who will share an overview of the framework and analysis and some of the key findings, and then we will go into a discussion with our panelists. Paul, over to you.
Great, thanks, Kristen. And just to flag, I'm joined today by my colleague, Jenna Stewart, who's also one of the co-authors and led most of the analysis. So just wanted to shout out to Jenna. She'll be joining us for the Q&A. Yeah, so thanks, Kristen, for teeing it up. I think you did a great job at kind of landing on why there is more and more demand from companies to do an assessment of the full value of water. And we found that using a framework like the one that we're going to share today has proven very helpful to do so. So just to kind of build off of what Kristen introduced, a lot of companies have gone about building the business case internally to act on water by assessing the risk it poses to the business, right? Or by assessing the negative externalities that they have on water resources and using that to compel leadership to unlock funding and capital to invest in water-related solutions anywhere across the value chain. But what has been missing, in great part, is a better understanding of what's the cost of those solutions if we want to take meaningful action, and also what are the benefits, right? How does a company benefit from engaging actively in water stewardship and investing in solutions that not only address their risks but also address their impacts? For some companies, that's been fine, and I think it's fair to acknowledge that there are many actors that understand that water is a key ingredient to their business across the value chain, and they have not needed a quantitative assessment of the return on investment to unlock funding. But the reality is that many decision makers in the private sector, particularly those that aren't involved with topics like water, do still need stronger evidence, quantitative evidence, for how they're going to benefit in the long term from taking a proactive approach and managing water way beyond what's required from a compliance perspective, right? And that's where we found that applying a cost benefit analysis in this very holistic way has been invaluable, right? To unlocking a deeper understanding, a quantitative evidence base for how taking action on water anywhere across your value chain can really deliver value back to the business, and also, in many times, also to society. So how do we do this? If we move to the next slide, and what do we mean by kind of a holistic value of water? We start by first evaluating, what does a business as usual scenario look like for a company? If you don't take action, if you don't invest in water stewardship or an improved water management, what does that look like? What are the risks? What are the impacts you're having? And consequently, if you don't take action, what could those risks and impacts cost you as a business, right? So that's the first thing we do. We really want to understand what that business as usual scenario looks like, both from a risk and impact perspective and the implications to the company. Once you know that, then you can start to think about, okay, wherever in the value chain you have a risk or you have a major impact related to water, whether it's direct operations or upstream in your supply chain or downstream in consumer markets, if we were to intervene to address the impacts and or risks, what would the cost of those solutions be, right? So that's the first thing we look at. And you can see here in the table, that's that cost column. What's the cost of intervention for the business? If you're sharing costs with other actors in your value chain or in the catchment, what's the shared cost to them? Are there any extra externalized costs as well? And then we can say, okay, if you implement those solutions, what's the effectiveness of those solutions in addressing risk and impact? And consequently, what's the value created, to the business and to society in terms of avoided direct costs, avoided indirect costs, reputational and brand benefits from reducing those impacts, from reducing that risk, right? This applies to anywhere in the value chain. There are many pathways, right, through which value is created. I think, Kirsten, you alluded to kind of the main ones, right? There's security of supplies operationally, security of supplies in the supply chain. There are indirect costs that are avoided, such as penalties and fines and that emerge from liabilities related to water. There are also a lot of indirect benefits around brand value, customer retention, supplier retention, relationships with others in the catchment that all can kind of be bundled under this notion of brand value and reputational benefits. And then there are a lot of externalized benefits to society of companies taking action, right? So by identifying and quantifying what I just described, right? The business as usual scenario, what are your risks and impacts and the potential cost to the business of not taking action? What are the costs of solutions? And then what's the value created based on, the implementation of these solutions and their effectiveness anywhere across the value chain? We can start to think about what's our return on investment, right? What's the value created to the business relative to the cost to the business, and then what's the value to society relative to the cost of interventions, which you can calculate as a societal return on investment, right? So it really provides that foundation for creating metrics that most business decision makers outside of sustainability departments are very familiar with. It creates a common language to engage leadership, whether it's in legal or finance or investor relations or the C-suite, that they're used to looking at, that they understand, and that really provides a language to convey with them the urgency to take action and provide an evidence base for where taking action is really going to deliver benefits to the company and to society. So that's in a nutshell what the framework is. In the publication that's launched today, we introduced this framework and we provide an overview of how it can be applied, what types of data are typically needed. And then we provide an illustrative example of it being applied at a company level for the full value chain for a company in the apparel sector. One thing to keep in mind is that the framework is very much designed to be applicable at any scale. And with our clients, we've applied it across supply chains, right? We've applied it at a facility level, and we've applied it across the full value chain. Depending on the scale of application, you're obviously going to have different constraints in terms of what type of data is available, and you're going to have to make decisions and trade-offs, right, in terms of the granularity of the information, the accuracy and precision of the information. But suffice it to say that regardless of where you're going to apply it, the framework is very much designed to be applicable at all of those scales. If we go to the next slide. As I said, we applied it to an apparel company. Just to provide an illustrative example, I think it's important to flag that the results here shouldn't be interpreted for any sector or any company. This is very much just an example to illustrate the type of information that can be obtained. So we applied it to this one company. We applied it under two scenarios. Because we feel that there are many ways that companies could implement a water stewardship program and different ways that they could finance it, right? And so we came up with two very rough scenarios. Scenario one is the company incurs 100% of the cost of solutions everywhere across the value chain, which is extremely unlikely, right? Given that many of the impacts and risks are in the supply chain. And in those cases, solution costs are typically shared or co-financed by multiple actors in the value chain, and sometimes even outside of the value chain with public funding. And then scenario two, which may be more reflective of how things typically occur, is a cost share scenario, right? The solutions being implemented, those costs are shared between the company and other actors, whether it be suppliers or customers, the government, or other actors in the basin. That way, it gave us two different perspectives based on how the company would finance solutions. And you can see that the results are very indicative of some of the implications of pursuing one or another scenario, right? You can see that in scenario two, where you're cost sharing, there is a positive ROI and societal return on investment pretty much across the full value chain, right? Differently to that, we see that in scenario one, when the company is incurring all of the cost, 100% of the cost everywhere across the supply chain, in a great part of the upstream supply chain, that return on investment is negative, right? And that's not unsurprising, I would say, just given how big those impacts and risks are in areas upstream of the supply chain that are oftentimes very removed from the company, and where the company has very little control over, right? So I think that's highlighting kind of the type of information that you can get looking at the ROI and return on investment, right? Societal return on investment. It's also, I think, important to flag that we not only can look at the results in relative terms, but also in absolute terms, right? Where is the biggest value and the biggest cost to the business? And that's what those columns are there. It's the percentage of the total cost and percentage of the total value captured by the business by applying a water stewardship approach. And you can see that there are huge value creation opportunities for the company, also for society, upstream, in this case, upstream in the supply chain, in the tier, particularly in tier 4, tier 3, and tier 2, the value captured by the business is huge, right? And that is because those places, in this case, in the apparel sector, is where those impacts are greatest, right? So those are places in the value chain where they're really going to be contributing to supply security, to resilience, to risk reduction in a very meaningful way, and hence the very high value captured, as you see here in those percentages. So anyway, that's a little bit about what I want to talk about. how to use these results. I think there's a laundry list of ways, and depending on whether you apply it at an enterprise level or at a supply chain level or at an operational, asset level, you're going to be able to use it differently. But whether you're a company or you're an investor, there are many ways that this can be useful. If you're an investor, if you do this at an equity level, it can really help identify listed equities that have the potential for water to really create value back to the business and value to society. It can help you optimize the selection of listed equities within a broader portfolio based on business value creation and societal value creation from a water perspective. If you're a company, not only can it help provide an evidence base for action internally that you can take to your finance department, risk department, legal department to help unlock funding and build the business case for really taking meaningful action. It can also help guide you on where, right, you may want to start taking action. Where is the greatest opportunity for value creation for your company? Where is the greatest opportunity for you to create value for your stakeholders in the catchment? This type of analysis provides that evidence, as you can see here in these columns, giving you a sense of where the value is greatest, and also what type of cost you should be expecting and planning for. So with that, I'll wrap it up. I'm happy, Kirsten, to take any follow-up questions from you or others when we go into the Q&A.
Terrific. Thank you so much, Paul, for that overview. And of course, we hope everyone dives into the full framework and analysis, but I want to draw on some of the themes you highlighted in your overview and bring in some of the other panelists. So first off, Paul, you alluded to, how we hope companies will find this framework useful. There's a number of ways, companies could use this, but importantly, as you mentioned, helping secure internal buy-in for the water stewardship work is really critical. So Jean, I want to pull you in as, company representative with Danone. My understanding is you've been undertaking this type of analysis internally, maybe not all of these elements of the framework, but you are sort of going down this path. So can you talk a little bit about that effort and just how in general you see this type of analysis as decision useful for companies such as Danone and perhaps your peers as well?
Yes, hi everyone. Hi Kirsten. Hi Paul. Very pleased to be with all of you today. I must say that I'm very pleased to talk about this cost and benefits analysis because it has been a real driver for change within the company. We modelized that with Paul and his team, Jenna in particular, that I would like to thank so much in being so resilient in helping us out in the work. And what I like about it and why it has driven so much change, it's because first, we were in capacity to plug it to the risk assessment we were doing before. So it's like, it's a continuous steps of improvement on how you make decisions within a company. We used to look at how much I am exposed to risk and how much I am impacting environment, or how drought are impacting my business through water footprint analysis, for example. With the cost and benefit analysis, we go one step further. We're in capacity to have the risk, the impact, to see how financially this is going to impact us, and to prioritize based on this materiality assessment the investment we would like to do based on a clear return on investment for our business. And I want to emphasize on this return on investment for the business, because societal return on investment is a really key element. It's important, especially when you are facing reputational risk. Let's say you need to understand how societally you are going to be in capacity to change the perceptions you have from society, but to drive change and drive investment with the companies, knowing that we have a lot of competitions with carbon and biodiversity and a lot of trade-offs on where I'm going to put my money. Using the return on investment and knowing that by investing in that type of interventions in that geography for that type of ingredients, let's say almonds in Spain compared to almonds in California, for example, it's really helped us to, yes, prioritize and put it at the right level of the company.
Great. That's terrific to hear that this has been such a beneficial exercise for you all. And I think we have a lot to learn from your pioneering work here. So Howard, I want to turn over to you as our other company representative and sort of draw out some similar questions here. But you know, you, I believe, have done quite a bit at Reckitt on impact valuation and some cost benefit work. So I'm curious, sort of a two-part question here. How does Reckitt evaluate different social impact opportunities and decide what initiatives or projects to support? And then how are you thinking about, you know, both the business and the social returns on investment as you work through that exercise? And, you know, how has this proven useful to your company?
Yeah, sure. Thanks. Great questions. And yeah, it's amazing to see the framework. Thanks, Paul, for running through it again so clearly. I think so many of the slides and so many of the diagrams speak so clearly to what we're trying to do at Reckitt. And it's about that conversation between these two areas of the business that maybe don't usually talk as much as they used to, or at least 5-10 years ago didn't. And that's the core business, and then the fluffy nice stuff which I do on the side, which is increasingly becoming part of core business, which is really, really exciting to see. You know, CSR is no longer a thing that we really want to talk about. We want to talk about the purpose of the business, the purpose of the company, and actually seeing it as a long-term investment and market building, those sorts of things, instead of just a nice piece of money that you chuck off to charity. So it's great that we're having this discussion. It's great that other corporates are interested, and the investors are interested as well. So the way we look at it is, you won't be surprised to hear me say, is we try and treat our social impact investments as we would any other investment in the business. And we kind of have a couple of frames that we apply. The first one is, are we going to create actual impact with water? Are we going to materially increase the access that people have to water, or increase the access to sanitation? The second one is, okay, well, is it linked to the business? Are we increasing access around our sites? Are we improving the water quality for our consumers? And are we reaching our business objectives, maybe our sustainability objectives, or our kind of social impact objectives that we've committed to as a corporate? And then also, are we contributing to sustained growth? Again, linking it to what the business is actually trying to achieve. And then the final piece is, okay, well, given that you're creating impact and you're contributing to the business objectives, what's the efficiency of the impact that you're creating, and how do you compare between your different opportunities? And that's where I think kind of this cost benefit analysis is key, because you get that ROI and you get that SROI, and you can take a view of both of them at the same time and say, does this make sense both for the business and for society? And then you don't have to weight one towards one or the other. You can actually say, okay, given everything, you know, Paul's given us a list of 15, 20 possible investments for the Apparel company. Well, they can choose the top two, and they can say, well, this is where our money's going to go furthest. And then it becomes such a different conversation that integrates the whole of the business. I'll stop there, but very, very happy to give examples of how we've been doing that with Reckitt as well.
Terrific. Yeah, it's so great to hear that this is opening those doors and really bringing these issues into some of those core business discussions. So that's really terrific. So Piers, I want to bring in the investor perspective on this, because I think it's really an important one to share. So as you mentioned in your introduction, you know, Franklin Templeton has been very keyed into water issues. And in fact, your institution serves as the co-chair role of the Valley Water Finance Initiative. So I'm curious, from that investor vantage point, how do you see this type of framework and then the resulting analysis as decision useful for you and for your peers?
Yeah, thank you, Kirsten. So this has been an exceptionally helpful framework for us, and in describing how useful it's been, I want to start with the importance of systems to investors, and speak that the role of systems is fundamentally important to the financial materiality to an assessment, because we know that across a traditional financial portfolio, let's say that around 75 to 95% of the return comes from market risk, which traditionally, you know, we can approximate that, or we can proxy that with beta. And so we know that the health of the system is totally linked to the investor financial materiality, and that there's a feedback loop between the financial system and the system in which all of our investee companies operate. And so if we're looking to identify risks and opportunities that are impacting repeatable and resilient investment returns, we don't just want to think about managing the minimum mean variance of our risk by trying to invest in companies that manage their idiosyncratic and sort of enterprise value material risks well. But what we also want to do is really target some of the causes of that volatility, which is where the big link to the systems come in. And through healthy systems, we are able to have more stable financial markets, and we're better able to capitalize on risks and opportunities, so that by having more productive systems, we're also able to have more productive companies within those systems. And so the SROI metric, we really use that as a proxy for externalized costs and contributions to system health, which has been something that's been exceptionally difficult to qualify, despite it being very clear to us of its importance in the investor decision process. And so where this is particularly useful in understanding is if we can identify where a company is undertaking a value extractive behavior, and that's resulting in a suboptimal outcome for the overall system, that's increasing the vulnerability of that system and the likelihood that it's going to create some sort of sensitivity or shock that's going to hamper the value of our other investments, then we can understand the overall negative investment consequences of that system level contribution that the company is making. And we can really use that to inform two things. We can better price the risk and allocate capital accordingly, so that we look for companies that are managing not just their financial capital well, but also their natural and human capital well, or water in particular as a part of the natural capital stock. And then we can also identify exactly to what extent and how companies are externalizing this cost, and we can then use that to build our engagement with them. And so as a particularly large investor and a large equity investor, Franklin is invested in around 10,000 equity securities. And so one of the big focuses of say my job is it's partially an engagement job, but it's also really a prioritization job. And so having this kind of quantitative assessment of SROI allows us to understand, okay, well, we can look at prioritized companies for engagement on the basis of risks that we understand to be financially material from, say, the SASB or the VRF framework or the ISSB standards. And then we can also look at metrics like SROI to go, okay, well, what companies are we going to prioritize for engagement on the basis of their overall impact on the system, which is driving the overall level of market return that our portfolios are exposed to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really helpful to think of that sort of system level and then getting down to prioritization. So just to follow up, I'm curious, do you think that investors can also play a hand in encouraging companies to take this kind of deeper analysis, and sort of how might that feed into some of your engagements, as you have dialogues with companies and what have you?
Yeah, so I think a lot of this information is going to allow us to have better or more clearly informed engagement asks when it comes to understanding systemic contributions. So when before we may have gone in and said, well, look, it's particularly important to us that you holistically manage your capital. You express a high level of holistic capital discipline. You manage your financial capital in a prudent way, but also your natural capital. And we can talk about maybe obvious sources of externalized cost. But what this allows us to do is be a little bit more specific and attach more and take it to a better level of granularity than we were previously. And really, when we engage companies, we are, well, quite literally invested in their success. So all of our engagements are aiming to be as collaborative with the company as possible. And so by the more information that we can add, will make our asks more appropriate and better considered, and something that we're more likely to be able to get the company towards a negotiated outcome with, that's going to create a better outcome both for the issuer and for us as investors across very diverse portfolios. And I think one of the things to note here is that we kind of talk a lot about externalized costs, but not often externalized benefits. There are companies that are creating significant externalized benefits on a lot of these capital stocks. That's something that we feel as investors should be better reflected as well. And so this will encourage companies not only to be able to identify where they're creating positive externalities on the system, but also sort of account for that and take credit for the good work that they're doing. And again, it comes back to this idea of we're really trying to encourage companies to have a more holistic notion of capital discipline. And in doing so, and this framework in particular allows us to just move from that quite high level theoretical assessment or request and go quite quickly down to identifying specific business lines, specific actions corporates can take, and really hopefully make our engagements a bit more effective. Because in reality, you know, as an engager, unless it's a very, very detailed engagement, you might typically get, you know, 3 to 6 hours with a company board or company management a year to discuss these issues. And so the data is incredibly helpful, but we can't spend hours and hours and hours working through these issues from first principles with the companies. So this allows us to build a much more informed engagement strategy from the offset and go in and make use of the limited time that we have. And I think one of the reasons why this is particularly useful is because this fits very well into our existing notion of fiduciary duty. It fits very well into our existing role of investors in pricing risk and allocating capital for repeatable returns. By quantifying system level costs and being able to express them in a way that's material to the individual issuers, we're using our traditional, we're using the proper role of investors, which is to generate returns for our beneficiaries, in order to affect the change, which doesn't require huge amounts of legal change or changes to the way that the financial system works in order to be able to address some of these instances of market failure, which at the system level are absolutely value destructive or value constructive in the positive case.
Yeah, so many great points. Thank you for all of that. I want to circle back to some of the comments that I made at the beginning and turn it over to you, Jean. The full value of water, as we were talking about, has many dimensions. So I'm curious, has the value of water been defined and internalized across Danone? Has this type of work helped in doing so? You know, the importance of water stewardship and its value may be clear to you and your sustainability team colleagues, but you know, what about the procurement teams and the finance team and, you know, even the board of directors? How have you been thinking about that internally at Danone?
But I think that when we listen to Pierce and Howard, we are understanding that through this cost and benefits analysis, it's not the sustainability topic anymore, but it's definitely a business topic. And so, yes, the value of water, at least a part of it, let's say, is integrated within procurement decisions, executive committee members' decisions now, where it's the basis for, yes, investment decisions. It's helping us to as well have a macroeconomic perspective to the company and saying, I have a portfolio of interventions, I have a portfolio of risk, I have a portfolio of interventions. And then I can decide which risk I am in capacity to absorb and which risk I absolutely need to tackle to really create value and then redistribute this value in the places where I have decided to intervene. So yes, then to the externalities and the benefits, we still need to work with investors in being in capacity to monetize those externalities, but it's another topic. And I hope in another course of work, we will be in capacity to go even there. But to drive decisions making, have very wise investment decision, this is really helpful.
Terrific. And Howard, you did sort of make that similar point earlier on and offered to give some examples. So I'm curious if you could share some examples or just more insight in, you know, how the value of water really has been internalized at Reckitt.
Yeah, happy to. I think Jahan's right, though, that it kind of depends who you speak to for the value of water. Just to quickly build on that point, procurement, they know the value of water for their part of the business. Sustainability, they know it for their part of the business. And I know the value of water for the social impact work that we do. So what does access to a tap mean for a family in Kenya who can now wash their hands or don't have to spend time going to the borehole? And it's the first one. The second one, okay, no time to go to the borehole, great. That's your kind of your human interest story. But the fact these people they can wash their hands, so they can use our products. They can flush the loo, so they might use our products. It's those sorts of things which start to then get interesting about, well, you market building, and okay, you're creating social impact. Absolutely, that's what we're here to do. But you're also integrating it into the return of the business. And that's it really, really struck home to me what Piers was saying about, okay, well, how are we thinking about the positive impact you're having on the system, and trying to quantify that. So the example I was going to bring up earlier, but stop myself, I realized I was taking a bit too much time, was in Mexico. We all know it's a water stressed area, and Reckitt have 4 sites there. So we use water, we dump water out of our sites, so we're very conscious of the water that we use within that area. It's also the case that 68% of schools only 68% of schools have enough water to stay open every day of the week, which is a ridiculous statistic, because if they don't have water, they have to shut down. They can't be responsible to the pupils that they have. So that's 18% less days at school for those students. So a huge social cost. So you can see that we've got a business imperative to take action because we're using water in those cases. And there's a very, very, very clear social impact that we can create. So by investing in being net water positive in those places, investing in increasing access to water, improving sanitation in communities around our sites, well, then it's a win-win. So not only are we're being responsible, consumers care about this sort of stuff, governments care, and we're able to improve our reporting against sustainability metrics, but also, and the angle which is less clear, which is what I began with, we're building that market because we're instilling proper behavior habits. So if you have access to water, then you can wash your hands and you get into the habit earlier. So I think I'm blessed to be part of a company which our products actually do good inherently. So it's quite easy for us to build the market and also talk about the social impact we create. So in a privileged position, I'm sure, but a little bit of an idea about how we're trying to blend all of those things and talk under a bit more of a unified voice, so we can capture those values under one number, which is really tricky.
Terrific. Yeah, that's really helpful to see how all the pieces are coming together in that example. So Paul, I want to turn to you. I think based on this conversation, I think, our colleagues at Danone and Reckitt may be ahead of the curve on this type of approach of thinking, but based on your many years of working with companies on water stewardship, do you think that there is sufficient motivation, awareness, maturity on water to really get uptake of this type of framework? And, if not, how do we, work together to ensure that we can bring companies to that place?
Yeah. Look, I'm going to piggyback off of what John said, which is doing a cost benefit analysis is only going to make sense if prior to that, you've built awareness internally around your interactions with water as a company, right? You have to have, awareness at all levels of the organization that there's a dependency, that there's risk, that there's impact. Maybe you don't know, where or how much, but that awareness that water matters to the business has to be in place, right? You also need to start to understand, where you're going to focus and what's your ambition. To define an ambition, you need to have a basic understanding of where risk and impact is across your value chain. I think it's very hard to ask a company to implement a CBA or cost benefit analysis framework on water and think about the full value of water if those 2 other things haven't been done. If you've not built awareness, if you don't understand your interactions with water, and you don't have an ambition to do something, then the cost benefit analysis just doesn't make any sense, because benefit to whom and why, right? Why are we going to act on water unless we know where it matters to the company and what we want to achieve? So that's a long way of saying, is there maturity in the market? We're starting to see it, right? The number of companies committing to taking meaningful action on water has increased tenfold over the past 5 years, right? So I think we're starting to see it. It's still, I would say, market leaders in certain sectors. So I think we need to go beyond that. But to your point, is it ready? It just depends. Those companies that have, put the hours in to build awareness and understanding and set an ambition, yes, there is a readiness. Those that haven't, I think it's going to be premature.
Yeah, no, that's good. You need that foundational work, and hopefully we can all help to implore folks to do just that. So Piers, I want to talk to you building on that point. I think, some companies haven't done that sort of foundational self-assessment and, aren't really fully aware of their water related risks. So, you're part of the Valuing Water Financial Initiative. I'm curious, how do you see initiatives such as that and investors' engagement with companies really helping to ensure that companies have that solid foundation and then can, take these further efforts to really understand more, the cost and benefit and where to focus work and how to prioritize? Curious if you have thoughts on that.
Yeah, there are plenty of thoughts, and I think as we've kind of seen in this conversation, there's a lot of range in where companies are in assessing these risks. But actually, with an issue that is totally systemic, like water, there is very, very broad consensus that it is relevant. And so, really, if a company is not identifying any exposure to water risk, then probably that's really that they just haven't looked for it. And so the way in which we would approach it from an engagement perspective is to really try and assess where the company is at in this journey, and recognize where water is relevant to their business, both from a contributions and from an individual issuer perspective, if they haven't done that already. And that's a great starting point of just understanding that risk, because in reality, you can't manage what you can't measure. And so I think really, even if there is the right governance structures in place, which are absolutely fundamentally important, unless you have a good handle of exactly where and how and to what extent these risks are manifest, then you're really going to struggle to implement even the best board level accountability or water risk policy or commitment, because you simply won't be able to tell exactly how this is relevant to you. And then I think for companies that are slightly more advanced on this journey and have a better understanding of where their kind of primary value chain exposures are, then we can begin to get into a conversation there. And I think this is really where investors are able to be quite useful partners, is a conversation about effectiveness and effective remedy. Because what we're not looking to do is ask every company to bend over backwards for solving immaterial risks that are immaterial to both them and us. What we're really asking the companies to do is to be accountable for their contributions to an externalized cost that we understand to both be relevant to the system that they exist within, and also relevant to the return of our portfolios for our beneficiaries. And so that's going to require moving from beyond that initial assessment to understanding, well, what is the most effective route to change, and also what's the most effective opportunity to realize it? Because one of the overall goals that we take to company engagement, and particularly through things like the Valuing Water Finance Initiative, is being able to align an issuer with our goal, which is to create a more productive system so that both them and us can realize greater opportunities. And not necessarily asking them to be accountable for the uncertainty or for things that they might not have effective levers of change over, but we will do this across our portfolios. And so hence there'll be we'll be exposed to each of the different levers, and companies will have an area and in which they're very effective, and there'll also be a degree of uncertainty. But it's through that sort of partnership that we get through engagement that we're able to understand, well, what are the appropriate changes that they can make to manage their own contribution rather than anyone else's, to the overall health of the natural capital stock or the water stock, in this case. And I think that Howard's point around the contagion of this risk is a really relevant one, because even as we begin to look, because given that water is such a fundamental human right, this mismanagement of water risk will pop up in lots of other areas. It's such a foundational piece of productivity that without appropriately managing we'll begin to see this risk become contagious into lots of other areas, and as it becomes more contagious, it'll get harder to track and attribute. So I think it makes a lot of sense to kind of address this at the source, starting with accounting, moving forward to effectiveness and recognizing uncertainty, but really kind of retaining a focus on getting an outcome that maximizes the amount of opportunity that's available from the sensible and kind of pragmatic use of water as a resource.
Yeah, that's a great way of thinking about it. Thank you. So we are running low on time. So just a reminder, if you have questions, please put them in the chat. I already had a number of them come through, but just one question to you, Paul, before we close out the discussion and move into those questions. I'd love to get your insights on how we think about all of this within the larger picture. I mean, we've heard snippets of that throughout the discussion, but you work with clients in a variety of ways to support their water stewardship work. So really, how do you see this work fitting into the bigger picture of water stewardship and water management?
I see the cost benefit analysis as a tool, right? As a tool to help implement an ambition in a meaningful way, in ways that ensure value creation for the company, like we've heard, and hopefully also for society, right? We in our work so far, we see that that's a major hurdle. I think a lot of companies engage in the conversation around water, will assess interactions with water, and will even set an ambition. But when it comes to implementing and really unlocking funding, it's very difficult to do. And it's very difficult to do with confidence, right? Am I investing in something that really creates value? Am I overclaiming what I'm doing? And am I setting myself up for criticism and greenwashing or bluewashing? Right. So there's a lot right now, a lot of skepticism and hesitation to really unlocking capital in a meaningful way, right? In a watershed. The bulk of the work we do is helping in that phase, right? Assessing risk, great. You can use public tools, you can use local tools, you can, do creating ambition. There are plenty of NGOs helping you set the bar, right? But now meet your ambition and meet it in a way that your assets are happy with it and see value created at the facility level for them, doing it with procurement, right? Our procurement team seeing value created for them. It's hard. It's really, really hard. So the more tools we have that help break down silos within the company using common language and tools that are holistic, right, that really think about risk, impact, and value to the business and society, I think that's where it's going to be, most instrumental. And as you alluded to in your introduction, some of the approaches that have been tried in the past haven't really worked, right? Full price of water, right? Shadow price, full cost. We've seen companies try this for years. It really never stuck, right? So what we're seeing with the cost benefit analysis and with valuation more broadly is that it's finally starting to reach the audience internally and starting to allow to have conversations and build confidence in those decisions around, where are we really going to put our money, right? So that's how I see it. Based on our exposure in the market, but maybe others, other panelists, if you disagree or see other things, please do weigh in.
No, that's a great way to sum it up. Thank you, Paul. And I'm going to move to a few audience questions that have come in. So there's been a number of questions around sort of supply chain and how the companies are really thinking about this and then implementing it within the supply chain. So I know, Paul, you had said that, some companies might look at this in different contexts, the enterprise level, the operations, the supply chain. So just turning it over to our company representatives, do either of you have sort of examples or thoughts on how to best use this type of framework within the supply chain?
I can talk to that maybe. So we isolated two types of interventions more specifically. One which is interventions around regenerative agriculture. So it's about transitioning farmers to be more resilient towards any water-related event, droughts or floods. And we as well valued different procurement costs that can happen. So, for example, if you cannot procure one ingredient in some place, you need to buy it to somewhere else. So that's the two kind of pathways we have been looking at, to give an example. And what was good, I know I saw the questions around almonds, is that we were in capacity to look at different scenarios. Should I invest, for example, should I decide to have a farm level interventions? Or should I go for a more collective approach, looking at the full landscape and tackling the issues at the watershed level? And we see with the cost and benefits analysis that the return is much higher when you have a collective approach, because you share the risk and you create more value for your business and for the ecosystems around in which you are sourcing. So that's really helpful to inform as well the scale of interventions you would like to do within your company, and not to focus necessarily on farm level interventions, even if, of course, it's important to build your case. But so yes, one example of how we use that then.
Terrific, really helpful. And another question coming in for probably Bluerisk, so Paul or Jenna, you've made some assumptions you acknowledged with this illustrative example. So how can a company or an investor working with such a framework really ensure that the analysis is, at the end of the day, decision useful? Any sort of top level tips there?
I'm happy to weigh in, and then maybe Jenna, if you want to weigh in as well. We developed, well, two things. One is to ensure its decision useful, and John, maybe you can speak to this as well. I think you need to bring in your target audience as soon as possible during the development phase of the cost benefit analysis, to build awareness and confidence in the framework, and also confidence in the data that's going to be used. You know, if you wait to the 11th hour to bring in your stakeholders internally, it's going to be very hard for them to see it as a credible decision support tool. So that's right off the bat one thing that we've always tried to prioritize. And then the second is be very open and transparent about the data you're going to use. And Jenna, maybe you can speak to this, but we developed a data source prioritization hierarchy, right? So depending on the scale at which we're applying the cost benefit analysis, you're going to have more or less access to different types of information. So we created this hierarchy, and it allows us very quickly to say, okay, top priority is going to be primary data, right, from the organization in question that you're working with. If that doesn't exist, right, next best option, it's going to be whatever, right, disclosed information by the organization. If that's not involved, disclosed information by another organization in their sector. So we have this hierarchy, and the uncertainty of each data source, right, is going to start to go up as you go through the hierarchy. So by having that and sharing that internally and having it well documented, I think that's the other thing that's going to give your end users a lot of confidence. So I know Jenna or Jean, if you want to add anything, but I think bring in your audience and then be very transparent about what information you're using, acknowledging uncertainties. Thumbs up. That's
really helpful. Anything to add, Jenna or Jean? No worries if not.
No, I would agree with that, and just highlight that in the analysis that is in the report, we did include a table that shows what Paul is talking about with the types of data that are recommended to use.
Great. Well, I see that we are at the top of the hour, unfortunately. So we could, I'm sure, continue this conversation for a long time, but want to make sure we respect everyone's time. So I want to thank our terrific group of panelists. I've definitely learned a lot, and I hope the audience has as well. And I hope you find the framework a really valuable tool in your water stewardship journey. So I want to give a special thank you to the full project team of Paul Rieg, Jenna Stewart, Kate Voss, Shama Praveen, and Sam Vianney for all of their important contributions to this work. And I encourage you all to download the full framework and more information about the Valuing Water Finance Initiative. It's linked through this QR code or in the chat. And thank you all for joining, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you so much. Thank you,
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks all.
Thanks, everyone. Cheers. Bye.
Bye.